Okay, have you ever opened up your closet and it's like, whoa, too much stuff?
Oh, yeah, that's me like every other week.
But like, imagine if those clothes, weren't just about like style, but they were like tied to a part of you that maybe like not everyone sees.
Right.
And that's what we're going to look at today. Gender Benson writes about this challenge from, the perspective of being a crossdresser. And for Jen, decluttering it's a lot more than just like making space.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
about navigating personal feelings and societal pressures and even like safety concerns.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating look at how our stuff can get, all tied up in our sense of self. Like letting go of some things can almost feel like you're letting go of a part of yourself.
Totally. And so in this deep dive, we are going to unpack Jen's strategies for decluttering these kinds of, emotionally charged possessions.
Okay, sounds good.
She talks about this recurring purge cycle that a lot of cross-dressers experience.
Yeah.
What's going on there psychologically?
So the purge cycle is really all about this tension, between like personal desire and societal pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine feeling this like pull to express yourself, but then also maybe this fear of being judged, or even like this internalized belief that a part of you is, I don't know, wrong or unacceptable.
Right.
It can lead to these cycles of like you accumulate things and then you're overwhelmed by guilt or shame. Then you just purge everything. It's like this sudden, desperate attempt to like erase that part of yourself.
Yeah, it makes me think about, we all have those things, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's like a box of old love letters or that T-shirt you just can't get rid of even though it has holes in it.
Totally. It's like the stories that we attach to things.
Yeah.
Like they become these links to our past, our dreams, our fears. And letting go can feel like you're losing a part of that story.
So how do we approach decluttering when it's like these emotionally charged items?
Right.
Jen mentions a structured purge as a way to kind of navigate this.
Yeah.
What makes that different from just like chucking it all in a donation bin?
I think a structured purge is more about making conscious choices.
Okay.
So it's not reacting out of guilt or shame.
Okay.
It's about taking the time to figure out why you're holding on to something. Like, does it still, serve you in a positive way?
Okay, so it's more thoughtful, less impulsive. I like that.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so Jen suggests you like set aside some time, maybe like an hour or two,
Okay.
and then choose one category of clothing, like dresses or tops.
Right.
Go through each item and you ask yourself, do I love this? Do I wear this? Does this make me feel good?
Right.
And if the answer is no to any of those, it's probably, good to donate.
That's helpful. It's like a set of criteria.
Yeah.
Jen also brings up this fear, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially when donating clothes that might be seen as different. What if someone like recognizes the item and then they make judgments about the person who donated it?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And I think it speaks to this, very real fear of like being outed or misunderstood. But Jen's advice is like, try not to overthink it.
Okay.
Donation centers see all kinds of stuff, and they're not really scrutinizing every item.
Right. But still, that fear is personal. So what are some practical ways to deal with that anxiety?
Okay, well, Jen suggests a couple things. If you're worried about people in your town recognizing things, maybe drive to a donation center in a different town.
Okay.
Or look for like an unattended drop-off bin. That way you could be totally anonymous.
That's a good idea. It makes me think, like, we tend to create these stories in our heads about what other people are thinking.
Oh, yeah.
But in reality, most people probably aren't even paying attention.
Right. We project our own, insecurities onto others. It creates so much anxiety. It's important to remember that everybody has their own, like, experiences and perspectives. And what seems unusual or different to us might be totally normal to somebody else.
That's a good point. So we've talked about, the emotional challenges, some practical tips. But what about the actual process of donating? Are there like guidelines for what you should and shouldn't donate?
Well, Jen makes a good point about being mindful of who you're donating to.
Okay.
Like most clothes are fine, but she suggests being discreet about undergarments and wigs.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, would you want a used wig from a donation center?
Probably not.
No.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes. Like, would you feel okay receiving this item?
Right.
If not, then maybe it's better to get rid of it discreetly.
I like that. It's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
And it applies to a lot of things, not just clothes.
Totally.
It's about respecting the person who's going to get this. Make sure it's usable. I'm curious, does Jen have any other guidelines for making those like tough decisions about what to keep and what to give away?
She does. She mentions what she calls a mental test.
Okay.
Ask yourself, would I be willing to be why this item used?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
They think about the actual value.
So we've talked about, the emotional weight of possessions, being discreet and thoughtful donation. But what about the practicalities of donation itself? Where do you even take this stuff? What are the options?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Jen does mention some big names, but I think it's also important to look at what's available in your community.
That's a good point, because beyond those big names, there might be like smaller charities or shelters that could really use those donations.
Right, and it makes you think about how your unwanted items can actually make a difference in someone else's life.
I like that. It's not just about getting rid of stuff. It's like giving these items a second life.
Exactly.
And it kind of ties into that sense of empowerment we were talking about, right?
Totally.
Like you get to choose what you keep, what you let go of, and where those items end up. You're in control.
Yeah, you're making choices that line up with your values.
And speaking of empowerment, Jen says it's important to just take action.
Hmm?
Don't get paralyzed by overthinking. Just start somewhere, even if it's just like one drawer.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get overwhelmed when it's, emotionally charged items. Just break it down into smaller steps and celebrate along the way.
Yeah, small wins.
Yeah,
And if you get stuck, remember that mental test, right?
right.
Would you buy this used? Such a simple question. It can help you make those tough choices.
Yeah, and it really helps you detach from that emotional weight we give our stuff.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've explored the complexities of decluttering when it comes to, emotionally charged items, especially from the perspective of a crossdresser. We talked about the importance of discretion, the power of thoughtful donation, and how freeing it can feel to let go.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But there's another layer to Jen's perspective that I think we should unpack, like the practicalities of donation.
Right.
It's like, where do you take this stuff? What are your options?
Absolutely.
And we'll dive into all that and more in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it. So we were talking about where to actually donate these items.
Right.
And it's interesting how, choosing where to donate can add a whole other level of meaning to this whole thing.
Yeah, totally. It's like you're not just getting rid of stuff,
Yeah.
You're deciding where it's going to go and who's going to benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
For Jen, these clothes, they're more than just clothes.
Right.
It's tied to her identity.
Right. Yeah.
So choosing where to donate is like a way of honoring that part of herself.
It's like she's saying, these things were important to me.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure they go somewhere they'll be appreciated.
Exactly. And it could be a way to support a cause that you really care about.
Mm.
Maybe it's an organization that helps LGBTQ plus people, or a shelter that gives clothes to people experiencing homelessness.
It's not just about getting rid of stuff.
Right.
It's about making a positive impact.
And you might even find a sense of community.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Imagine finding an organization that really speaks to you, and knowing your donation
Yeah.
is helping people right in your own town.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to find these organizations?
Well, you could just do a simple Google search,
Mhm.
look for keywords like
Yeah.
clothing donation, LGBTQ plus support, stuff like that.
Hmm.
Oh, and homeless shelters.
Yeah, makes sense.
Add in the name of your city, too.
And I bet local community centers and libraries probably have info too.
Yeah, for sure. And, don't forget about word of mouth.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Ask your friends, family, colleagues if they know any good organizations.
Yeah, tap into those networks. And social media's got to be good for this too.
Totally. You could post asking for suggestions, or check out the pages of local organizations and see what they're all about.
So many options beyond just like the big names.
Yeah, there really are. It's worth it to explore and find the right place for you.
And speaking of finding the right place, Jen mentions those big names like Goodwill and Salvation Army, but she also says it's good to look at local options.
Yeah, because there might be smaller organizations in your community that really focus on helping LGBTQ plus individuals or people who are homeless.
Right.
These places, they really rely on donations,
Yeah.
and they might be able to do even more with your stuff.
It's like those clothes could go to someone who really needs them and would feel connected to them.
Right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
about giving back to your community and maybe even helping someone feel a little more seen and accepted.
Love that.
Yeah.
It's like taking something so personal and turning it into something that can help someone else.
Yeah, it's recognizing that even our unwanted things have the power to, make a difference for someone.
And sometimes letting go can be just as good for the giver as it is for the receiver.
Totally. Like freeing up space in your life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
both like physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
You're closing a chapter and making space for new possibilities.
Which reminds me of what Jen was saying about the purge cycle
Mm-hmm.
and how it can be tied to feeling guilty or ashamed.
Yeah.
Any advice for people struggling with that?
First of all, just remember you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people experience those feelings,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things tied to their identity.
It's like those clothes become a symbol of a part of you you might not be ready to share with everyone.
Right, exactly.
So decluttering almost becomes like you're trying to make peace with those different parts of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which can be tough. Like it's one thing to donate clothes you just don't wear anymore,
Yeah.
but it's a whole other thing when it's about something so personal.
Right, and that's where self-compassion comes in.
Okay.
Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel those emotions. Just don't judge yourself for it.
So instead of beating yourself up,
Yeah.
just let the feelings be there.
Exactly. And remind yourself that you're doing your best.
Yeah.
Decluttering's a process.
Right.
It's okay to go at your own pace.
It's easy to get caught up in wanting to do everything perfectly,
Yeah.
but there's no right or wrong way, really.
Exactly. It's about what works for you.
And if you're feeling overwhelmed, remember, there are resources to help.
Yeah, for sure. Like
Yeah.
therapists, support groups, online communities.
Yeah, you don't have to do this alone.
Right. There are people who get what you're going through and can offer support.
And don't forget to celebrate your progress along the way.
Yeah. Every little step you take towards creating a space that feels more like you, that's a win.
Okay, so we've talked about finding the right place to donate,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with guilt and shame, seeking support.
Yeah.
But there's one more practical thing we haven't talked about yet, like actually getting the stuff to the donation center.
Oh, right. That's
Yeah.
important. Do you have a car?
Yeah.
Can you transport things yourself?
Mm.
Or do you need to look into like pickup services or ask a friend to help?
Good questions. It might be helpful to call the donation center and see what their rules are.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. And while you're on the phone, you can ask if they have any restrictions on what they take.
Right. Some places might have specific needs, so it's best to check.
Definitely. And another practical tip,
Okay.
make sure the clothes are clean and in good condition before you donate them.
Yeah, common courtesy.
Exactly. It shows respect for the people who will be receiving and sorting everything.
So we've covered a lot about the practical stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to circle back to something Jen said about discretion.
You mean like it's okay to be careful about who you share this with?
Exactly. It's not about being ashamed. It's about realizing that not everyone's going to understand or be accepting.
And that's totally fine. You choose when and where to share these parts of yourself.
It's your story.
Mm.
You have the right to tell it on your own terms.
Exactly. And remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are or how you express yourself.
This whole conversation is making me realize that decluttering,
Yeah.
especially when it's stuff that's connected to our identity,
Mm-hmm.
it's so much more than just getting rid of stuff.
It really is. It's a journey of self-discovery,
Yeah.
letting go, connecting with our values.
It's about creating a space that reflects who we really are.
Exactly. Honoring our past,
Mm-hmm.
embracing our present,
Right.
making choices that match the future we want.
And it's about realizing that even our unwanted stuff can have a positive impact.
For sure.
Okay, so in this part of the deep dive, we've covered the practical side of donating,
Mhm.
how important discretion is,
Right.
and that mental test for making decisions.
Yeah. Powerful stuff.
But I think there's another layer to Jen's story that we should look at.
Okay, what's that?
That connection between decluttering and identity.
Yeah, like how our things can almost feel like they're a part of us.
Exactly. And how decluttering can help us sort through those different sides of ourselves.
Right, I like that.
In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to really dig into that and explore how letting go of stuff can sometimes help us grow and change as people.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we were talking about that connection between decluttering and identity.
Mm.
This idea that our things can feel like a part of us.
Yeah, it's like they're little time capsules of our past selves, and they're
Right.
like those tangible links to, I don't know, our dreams or aspirations.
Yeah, and sometimes holding on to them can feel like a way of holding on to those parts of ourselves, even when we, change as people,
Right, exactly. Like we're afraid to let go of those old versions of us.
even if they don't fit who we are now.
Mhm.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think the first step is to recognize that our identities aren't fixed. We're
Okay.
always changing, growing,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing.
It's like shedding those old layers, right?
Yeah, like a snake shedding its skin.
I like that.
We can shed those old parts of ourselves without losing who we really are.
So it's not about erasing the past. It's more about acknowledging it and then moving forward.
Exactly. And sometimes letting go of those physical items can actually help us grow and change as people.
Can you explain that a little more?
Sure, when we hold on to things that we don't need anymore, they kind of weigh us down,
Hmm.
both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
They clutter up our space, they clutter up our minds,
Right.
and that makes it harder to really embrace who we are now and who we want to become.
So by letting go of those items, we're actually creating space for new things to come into our lives.
Exactly. New experiences, new opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even new relationships.
And new sides of ourselves.
Totally. When we let go of the old one, we make space for something new.
This reminds me of what Jen said about being discreet.
Hmm.
It's not about being ashamed.
Right.
It's about realizing that not everyone's going to get it,
Yeah,
and that's okay.
exactly. We get to choose when and how we share those bolts of ourselves.
On our own terms.
Yeah, it's about setting boundaries, creating a space where we feel safe and comfortable.
It's about owning our stories and deciding how we want to share them.
I think that's a great takeaway for everyone.
Yeah, so to wrap up this whole deep dive into what Jen had to say about decluttering,
Hmm.
I want to thank you for, sharing your expertise.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you learned something new today about decluttering.
Yeah.
Not just your things, but also those emotional attachments that can be tough to let go of.
Remember, be kind to yourself, take your time, and celebrate your progress.
Right, small wins.
And don't forget, you deserve to create a space that feels like you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So until next time, keep diving deep.